And good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Rutherford Sports Network. And my name is John Thomas Hill. And if you've been following this podcast for any length of time, you know we don't talk so much about the ins and outs of the game, X's and O's and all of that. We tend to focus on a broader sense of like sports business, sports broadcasting, and other things. And tonight I'm going to talk about possible expansion prospects in the major leagues, the likelihood we may see them, which cities might get expansion franchises, would we see more franchise movement in other major leagues and such, which franchises would move if that's the case. I'm going to start with the NFL. And as we all know, the Las Vegas Raiders are a thing now. They moved from Oakland. And currently, it doesn't look like we're going to see any teams move anytime soon. There's always rumblings or something, every so often you'll hear this. But at the current time, it doesn't look like we're going to see any franchises move anytime soon. There are currently 32 NFL franchises, but recently there has been some discussion about the NFL expanding to maybe 36 teams or perhaps even as many as 40 teams. Now, the pros and cons are obvious. The NFL is perfect right now with 32 teams. You have four-team divisions. It's pretty balanced. Why would you try and bring in more teams? Well, the obvious, money. The expansion fees are going to be several $1 billion. I'd say at least $2 billion to get into the league, which would be extremely difficult for some possible expansion franchises. But there are some cities that are on the case. Now, the first is St. Louis. As you may not be aware, or you may be aware, last week they settled the case involving the city of St. Louis, and I think even the the state of Missouri was involved. But I think it was mainly the city of St. Louis settled with the NFL, and Stan Kroenke, the owner of the now LA Rams, formerly the St. Louis Rams, to the tune of something like $750 million, something like that. Now, if that does anything to their expansion prospects, I'm not sure. But, excuse me, that yawn came out of nowhere. It's 9:19 here, and I'm an old man, so you'll have to forgive me. My feeling about St. Louis expansion prospects are if the NFL does decide to expand and St. Louis is willing to put in a new stadium for whatever St. Louis franchise name would be, I think they've got a very good chance of getting a new team. The St. Louis market's very huge. It's mainly a very passionate baseball area, but there's a lot of football fans you can bring in from Tennessee, from Illinois, from Missouri, obviously, from Arkansas, from Iowa. So you can pull those folks in, and you'll be obviously there's going to be instant rivalry with the Chicago Bears, Kansas City Chiefs. So the fact that they've had teams before and legitimately probably lost the Cardinals because they just were not willing to play ball with the Bidwell family. Now, whether or not that was a good thing or not remains to be seen, but my feeling is that was probably going to happen regardless because the Bidwell family wanted it. But the Rams are an interesting story because they moved there in 1995 from LA originally. They had this wonderful stadium. It was the greatest show on turf. You had Kurt Warner and the great years they had there with Isaac Bruce, Marshall Faulk, and so many other great stars there. And then that came to an end, and the Rams were kind of stagnant for quite a while there. They had moments where they looked like they might break through. The Jeff Fisher era was kind of what might have killed the Rams. Not necessarily blaming him, but I think the Kroenke, when he took over, probably was eyeing Los Angeles for the longest time. I think St. Louis could get a third shot at an NFL franchise, especially considering that the NFL knows that St. Louis was trying to do everything they could to keep the team there. And it's awfully hard to fault them when St. Louis was had a new stadium new stadium plans in place. They had some funding getting ready to be made available. The state was going to pitch in, if I'm not mistaken. The city definitely was going to pitch in. And Kroenke moved anyway. But I think the chances are, if the NFL does expand, St. Louis is a likely option. Another one is San Antonio. Now, automatically you're going to see Dallas and Houston kind of lobby against this. But at the same time, I don't know if they'd go out and all and out block them. The McNair family might, because Houston and San Antonio are closer, if I'm not mistaken, than Dallas and San Antonio. If I'm wrong about that, my apologies. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, San Antonio is closer to Houston than it is to Dallas. But I'd have to... Hey, there's a way I can check out. Hey, Alexa, is San Antonio closer to Houston than Dallas?
Here's something I found on the web. According to Wanderoo.com, San Antonio, Texas, is closer to Houston than it is to Dallas.
Oh, so that. Huh. I hate when I do a podcast, all of a sudden, the yawn strike. Okay, anyhow. San Antonio obviously would need a new stadium. They've got the Alamo Dome, but the Alamo Dome is not NFL caliber right now. They'd have to do a major renovation to the stadium, which would mean that UTSA, University of Texas San Antonio, would have to find a new place to play their college games. They may not want that. And they don't want to necessarily tear the stadium down, because you can still use that as a variety of venues and all that. But they would need to build a brand new stadium. Would you want a dome stadium in Texas? Would you want an open air stadium? Because currently the two teams they have there have retractable roof stadiums, although I don't think Dallas ever really retracts their roof. But Houston would definitely benefit by having another rival there, maybe even a division rival, maybe a conference rival. Although I think the McNair family would not necessarily be too fond initially with the idea of a team coming into San Antonio. I think San Antonio's chances are really good. If there's a good ownership group there, if there is a stadium plan in place to either renovate the Alamo Dome or build a brand new stadium entirely. Now, another town that gets mentioned is Toronto. And while it's a very hot topic, it's been like that since the Bills played some games there a few years back, when there was talk of the Bills maybe moving to Toronto. And it may still be that way, because Buffalo is right now in the midst of a controversy about whether or not they'll build a brand new stadium for the Bills. The problem is, it's in a foreign country. Major League Baseball, the NBA and NHL have to deal with the fact, especially the NHL has to deal with the fact that there is a discrepancy in currency. The currency exchange rates fluctuate. And traditionally, the Canadian dollar is not worth as much as the U.S. dollar. and I don't see that being pegged even anytime soon. Whereas a dollar in the U.S. is a dollar Canadian. I don't think that's ever going to happen. It's generally between 85 cents and 90 cents U.S. dollars for Canadian, something like that. But basically, the main stumbling block to that would be the exchange rate. Now, it's been overcome in the NBA and NHL, obviously, and Major League Baseball to a very degree. Could the NFL do that? I kind of have my doubts. Plus, if Toronto got an NFL franchise, what would happen to the Canadian Football League? The Argonauts would more than likely have to move, or they'd have to move out of the Sky Dome, or whatever they're calling it nowadays. And the CFL is now just recovering from the pandemic. Whether or not they're all the way recovered remains to be seen. But I don't think the Canadian Football League would want an NFL franchise in Toronto, and I think the Canadian government might get involved to try and block a move to Toronto. Whether or not that would prevail remains to be seen. But I just don't see it happening anytime soon. A lot would have to happen. There would have to be assurances the CFL would be protected. That would almost assuredly mean the Canadian Football League would get some sort of money from the NFL. I don't know how that would work out, but I kind of doubt Toronto would ever become a NFL franchise. London is another prospect that we hear from time to time. Here's the problem I have with it. Playing 2, 3, or 4 games a year over there in London, it's a novelty thing. It's a cool thing. Hey, we get a couple of games a year. Fans from all sorts of different teams in the United Kingdom and all throughout Europe come to London to watch these games. It's a big difference between that and having your own team. And this is a foreign sport. And Britain loves their soccer, or what they call football over there. They love their rugby. They love their cricket. They haven't taken as well to basketball as their European counterparts have, or to hockey. And obviously baseball is a very niche sport played by very few over there. And there are people who play American football over there, obviously. I don't think you're going to see London get an expansion franchise anytime soon, even if Roger Goodell and some of the owners may want it to. I just don't think the numbers add up. And plus, the long road trips, both for London traveling to the United States and for teams traveling to London, would make it prohibitively expensive, especially if times get tough and, it costs a lot of money to fly overseas and teams may not want to pay that. I just don't think London will ever get a franchise. I just don't see it happening. Because A, you may see the other sports leagues over there kind of lobby against it. And I just don't think the long-term support would be there. Portland, Oregon. Portland is like the popular expansion spot for so many sports. Major League Baseball, NHL, NFL. Right now, all Portland has are the Trailblazers. They're massively popular in Portland. Even when they're having a bad season, they're popular. They would need a new stadium. And by the way, let's not forget the Portland Timbers, who today were in the MLS Cup final at Portland. They unfortunately lost in a shootout to New York City FC. I want to mention that. So the Timbers are very popular in Oregon and the whole Cascadian region, along with the Seattle Sounders. The problem with Portland is that there is a lot of passion for sports there. Does it have the market to sustain an NFL franchise long term? Especially when you have the NHL looking at Portland, especially if you have Major League Baseball starting to look at Portland. I'm kind of on the fence with Portland. I could see them getting a franchise. Obviously, the Seahawks would maybe look to block it, but I don't think they would necessarily win in that case. They might look at it as maybe having a close-by rival to really help build up the NFL in that region of the country. I would tend to lean against it. Memphis. Every new football league that comes about has to have a team in Memphis. The old World League had a team in Memphis, the Southmen. USFL had the Memphis Showboats. The World League had Memphis as a team. I can't remember what the franchise's name was. The XFL had one. The new XFL didn't. The old one did. There's a reason for that. There's a lot of people in Memphis. It's definitely got a big metropolitan area. And really the only competition they'd have there are the Memphis Grizzlies, who kind of fluctuate a little bit, depending on how well they're doing. But normally they have a pretty good turnout for the games. For a brief period of time, maybe 2 years, I think, the Oilers played there on the move from Houston to eventually Nashville. They played in Memphis for maybe a year or two, I think, in the Liberty Bowl. And that's the key to Memphis, is they'd have to do a major overhaul of the Liberty Bowl or just build a brand new stadium. Is the will there to build a brand new stadium? That's the key. Do the voters in Memphis want a brand new stadium? That would be a huge issue there. I could see it happen. It's in an area, it's far enough away from the Titans to where you could have built up enough of a fan base there that would not bleed away from the Titans so much. The Titans would probably oppose it, as well as the Saints, but I think you could see both those teams mollified to where they would have some intense rivalries with whatever Memphis franchise. Birmingham, another city that seems to crop up anytime there's a new professional football league come along. They would need a new stadium. They're going in the process of demolishing the Legion Field. They're going to build a new stadium, or have built a new stadium for UAB that is not NFL ready. It's small college CUSA ready. But it wouldn't take much to build a new stadium on the Legion Field site that would be ready to host NFL football. Obviously, the Falcons and the Saints and the Titans would be none too thrilled with this, but Alabama's a hotbed for football. If you build a new stadium, more than likely they would move the Iron Bowl back to Birmingham as a neutral site for Bama and Auburn. You would have a great variety of events there. I think Birmingham's got a good shot at getting an NFL expansion franchise. Orlando. Like Memphis and Birmingham, every time there's a new football league, Orlando gets a franchise. The problem with this is you've got 3 NFL franchises already in Florida. Would they be okay with a fourth, especially the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where Orlando is not that far away? That is the key right there. Would Tampa be okay with Orlando getting an NFL franchise? Obviously, they'd have to renovate the Citrus Bowl and do some major overhauls with it to bring it up to NFL specs. I'm kind of on the fence about this one because would Florida really support 4 NFL teams? Especially given the Jaguars have not exactly lit the league on fire since they came in, say, for a few years in the turn of the century where they looked pretty good under Tom Coughlin, and then once Tom Coughlin left, they've kind of struggled, say, for a year or two here. Austin, Texas. Austin has the same problem as San Antonio does. It's in the same state as 2 prominent NFL franchises. One is considered America's team. The other isn't, but is very popular to a degree in Houston. There had been rumors that if the Bills and Buffalo don't get a new stadium, they would move to Austin. I don't really see that happening because I think Buffalo, there are more attractive NFL relocation sites than Austin, Texas. Austin is a bit zigs where the rest of the state of Texas zags, so to speak. I don't think Austin would get it. I think if a team is going to go, another team's going to go to Texas, it'd be San Antonio. So I don't see that happening. Oakland, California. There is a desperate need for a new stadium in Oakland. The Coliseum has long since become obsolete. The A's are planning to move if they don't get a new stadium. And the city is not exactly doing a great job in getting them a new stadium. And I don't know if there's really a passion to keep the A's in Oakland, from what I've seen. Maybe there is to a certain degree, but maybe the fact that the Raiders have left, Golden State has left for San Francisco. Maybe Oakland has decided they don't want to have pro sports anymore, or at least Major League pro sports. They would desperately need a new stadium. Plus the fact that this would be the 3rd time Oakland would have a pro franchise. Would the Raiders block it? I wouldn't be surprised Mark Davis tried to block a team moving or a new expansion franchise in Oakland. Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City has grown tremendously. They've got the Thunder. They've had a USFL franchise back in the 80s. And that was during the oil boom times, and then the oil boom ended and they struggled for a bit. But things have improved in Oklahoma. I could see them going to Oklahoma. If they expand to 40 teams, I could see them going to Oklahoma. 36, I think they'd be on the outside looking in there. And finally, Mexico City. Mexico City, very populated, a lot of money to be made there, but the government has not always been stable there. And there is obviously political situations to worry about. There's immigration, obviously, being a hotbed that would possibly crop up during the expansion committee process. I'd love to say Mexico City would have a good shot at it, but there are so many cons there. A lot of pros, but a lot of cons as well. that I think that they would be too much of a risk for the NFL to take at 36 teams. 40, they might sneak in, but I don't really see that happening, in all honesty. Now, instead of just NFL expansion, let's talk for a moment about other expansions. Now, I said earlier the NFL is probably not going to have any teams move. There is a concern the Carolina Panthers might move if David Tepper, the owner of the Panthers, doesn't get a brand new stadium. I don't see that happening. First of all, I think he could be mollified if they expanded and put a retractable roof over Bank of America Stadium. I could see that happening. The Bears will move to the suburbs, according to the latest from the ownership group there. I don't see any other teams planning to move. Jacksonville has kind of rebounded, even though they're not exactly doing that great right now. There have been rumors in the past they might move to London. I don't see that happening. Really, unless there's a situation where the Chargers want to move to their own stadium like the Clippers are going to do, I don't see anything like that happening. Now let's go on to NBA possible expansion cities. And that's more of an interesting scenario there because obviously basketball is much more popular in a lot of these smaller markets. And the possibility of getting an NBA expansion franchise is better than the NFL. Obviously, Seattle's at the top of the list. They have a new arena. They have a new NHL expansion franchise that's doing very well right now. I could see the return of the Supersonics in the near future. I would even say it's more than likely going to happen in the near future. Louisville. They have an NBA caliber arena right now, the KFC Yum Center. They have a history with the Kentucky Colonels of the ABA. They're very passionate about both high school and college basketball in the state of Kentucky. I would say Louisville is a very good prospect for an NBA franchise, bringing back the Colonels. Whether or not they'd be named the Colonels remains to be seen. St. Louis. The interesting story there is when the ABA folded, the owners of the St. Louis team, the Spirits of St. Louis, took a prorated buyout, basically a share of NBA media money, so that they would be. So the NFL and NBA wanted them to fold, and they didn't really want to fold, but they got paid off to do it. St. Louis is a big market. There's really only the Blues and the Cardinals there. The Blues won the Stanley Cup a couple of years ago. The Cardinals are a very successful baseball franchise, one of the most successful. They're probably the second most behind the Yankees. Could they support an NBA team? Well, basketball is popular in Missouri. I could see it happen, but is it popular enough to support an NBA team? I'm kind of on the fence about that. Las Vegas, the popular site now for expansion teams. You had and moving teams from other cities. The Golden Knights have been very successful so far in the NHL. The Raiders moving to Allegiant Stadium has been a big thrill, even though the Raiders are not exactly lighting up things. They're kind of a 500 team so far this year. Here's my take. Vegas is one of those places that I could see it succeeding and I can see it failing. Vegas is a place where a lot of people have moved in there from other places of the country. There's not a whole lot of native people from Las Vegas. I'm on the fence about it. it can succeed, but the problem is it's going to be successful enough to where it'll. Will the are there other prospects that are more enticing? Excuse me, than Las Vegas. I just don't see Vegas really matching up against some of the other cities on this list. It's attractive. I just don't know if it's attractive enough, given the fact that there's a prospect of a baseball team coming there. The A's could be moving to Las Vegas, according to rumor and innuendo. I'm on the fence about that. Cincinnati. Ohio loves basketball. It's close to Indiana, close to Kentucky. It would obviously. It has the royal history of the Royals before they became the Kings, moved to Kansas City, then later to Sacramento. They would need a new building, an NBA caliber arena. I just don't think there is a real urge in the Cincinnati area for an NBA team. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't feel it. I think the odds are against Cincinnati getting an NBA team. Buffalo. Buffalo used to have the Braves until they moved to San Diego, and now they've moved to Los Angeles. We all know them as the Clippers, but they used to be known as the Buffalo Braves. Well, if they get a new team, they would not be known as the Braves, obviously, because Atlanta already has that name and does not really want to share that name, I'm sure. And obviously the connotations of Native American culture would be prohibitive to that. Could Buffalo support a team? Well, they've got an arena that has a successful, even though they've struggled in recent years, NHL team. The only other NBA team anywhere near them would be Toronto. But would Buffalo be passionate enough for the NBA to be successful there? That's a big question. I'm kind of on the fence there. There's a reason these teams moved away, both in Cincinnati and Buffalo. Tampa Bay. Now, Tampa Bay has obviously the Bucks, the Rays, and the Lightning. The Lightning have won the last 2 Stanley Cups. They are very popular. So are the Bucks. Rays, they really need a new stadium. Could that area support an NBA team? I have my doubts. First of all, you got Orlando not too far down the road, and they do pretty well at the gate, but having a team in Tampa would really hurt them. I would see Orlando blocking a move right there. So I think Tampa Bay would be less likely to get an NBA team. Norfolk, Hampton Roads. That has been a hotbed in the past for a possible NBA move. Couple of times where rumors have cropped up of a team moving to Norfolk. I think there's a good chance this could happen. It's an area that doesn't really have any pro sports teams at all, major pro sports teams. It's far enough away from Washington to not really compete with D.C., far enough away from Raleigh to not really affect the Hurricanes. I could see the NBA team being there. The return of the Virginia Squires, perhaps? Maybe not by that name, but I think there's a good chance Norfolk and Hampton Roads could get an NBA team. Baltimore. Too close to Washington. But the Northeast is very populated. You've got 3 teams in the New York area. There's plenty of support to go around. I mean, the Philadelphia is not that far from Washington, all things considered. It's just they would need a new arena. Almost certainly the Washington Wizards would not want the competition there. But it could be a quid pro quo, as in the Orioles were relented and allowed the Expos to move to Washington to become the Nationals. You could see Washington's Wizards be cajoled into letting an NBA team come to Baltimore. The problem is I don't really see Baltimore as being really, really hyped for NBA basketball. So I think that will not happen. Hartford, Connecticut. They would obviously need a new arena. But they're in between New York and Boston. They're kind of in that situation where a lot of people like New York teams there. A lot of people like Boston teams there. Would they be willing to give up Celtics and Knicks and Nets fandoms for a Hartford team? I doubt it. They'd have to be, the Hartford would more likely want an NHL franchise to bring back the Whalers than they would an NBA franchise. I mean, basketball is huge in Connecticut. I just don't see it happening. Raleigh-Durham, Tobacco Road, the heartbeat of ACC basketball. They've got an arena that could easily host NBA basketball games, which is the Carolina Hurricanes Arena, whatever they call it nowadays. Is it PNC Stadium Arena or whatever? I don't even know anymore. They're far enough away from Charlotte to where I think the Hornets would be okay with a team there. Obviously, it'd be a very powerful in-state rivalry. But here's the thing. The Canes have struggled outside of of recent times when they've been successful on the ice. When they've not been successful on the ice, they've struggled. And there were rumors of the team moving. If the Hurricanes are struggling there, I don't see the NBA really looking at bringing an NBA team there. So I kind of doubt it could happen. They would need new ownership. Would need an ownership that would be passionate about an NBA team there. I don't see it happening. Kansas City. They've had an NBA team there before. The Kings were there for a few years before they moved to Sacramento. Kansas loves basketball. Missouri loves basketball. Obviously, the Kansas Jayhawks. Missouri Tigers have been successful from time to time, especially under Norm Stewart back in the day. Kansas State's had their moments. They used to have the NAIA tournament. I don't know if they still have that there, which was a big deal back then. They used to have the Big 12 tournament. I think they still do. They have a brand new arena that's NBA caliber. But here's the thing. Sports business people have long memories. They know that Kansas City couldn't support NBA basketball for very long, but that was back in the late 70s, early 80s. I think there's a good chance Kansas City could get an NBA franchise. Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh only lacks an NBA team. They got an NHL team. They've got a Major League Baseball team. Make your jokes there. And obviously they have the Steelers of the NFL. The problem is that area of Pittsburgh, of Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh area, isn't exactly a basketball hotbed. The Pitt Panthers, when they were in the Big East, were very popular, but now they're in the ACC, they're not as great as they used to be. They're kind of a bottom-dwelling team now in the ACC. They've had a couple of ABA teams back in the day. There was a basketball movie that I can't even remember. Was it A Fish Called Pittsburgh or Fish from Pittsburgh, whatever it was? It was a wacky movie from the 1970s about an NBA team in Pittsburgh. They've got the marketplace to support it. I just don't think there's the passion for the NBA in Pittsburgh as you see in Philadelphia for the Sixers. I kind of lean against Pittsburgh getting an NBA franchise. And there's probably other cities I've left off the list there. So I'm just going to leave it for right now. NHL possible expansion. The obvious one that comes up almost every time there is talk of expansion or moving a team is Quebec City. It's not a matter of if they're going to get one, it's a matter of when. There have been talks with Gary Bettman about an expansion team going there. More than likely, I think the better odds are the Phoenix Coyotes may move to Quebec because Phoenix is not exactly doing that well in the Arizona area. And I think it's only a matter of time before the Phoenix Coyotes or Arizona Coyotes or whatever the hell they call them nowadays, I think it's just time for them to move. And I think Quebec City is the most likely place to get them. If they don't move there, then they're almost certainly going to get an expansion team. Another possible city is Milwaukee. Wisconsin loves college hockey. There are a lot of great hockey players who've come from Wisconsin. And a lot of people who know about hockey but don't really follow the NHL, which is kind of weird, but are surprised Milwaukee doesn't have an NHL franchise. I think there's a good chance within the next few years, if the NHL decides to expand, that Milwaukee gets a team. Now, whether or not Detroit and Chicago and Minnesota would be okay with that remains to be seen, but I think they would be. Especially considering you would have that border battle between Milwaukee and Chicago. And let's face it, the Blackhawks are massively popular in Chicago. Even with a team in Milwaukee, I don't think it's going to really hurt the Blackhawks all that much. Cleveland. They once had the Barons a long, long time ago for like 2 years. Before they're the last major league franchise to fold in any of the big four. They didn't get moved somewhere else. They simply ceased to exist. I don't see that happening. You have the Blue Jackets just down the road in Columbus. I don't see really a passion for Cleveland to get hockey again. I kind of doubt that'll happen. Another one, Cincinnati. Same reasons. Columbus is already there. They've established a fan base there. There's not a real passion for hockey in Cincinnati to the level that you would need to have a franchise. Another possible city is Oakland. They have an arena that's empty. Doesn't have a major pro sports franchise there. Once upon a time, they had a team there, the Seals, back at the beginnings of the NHL expansion back in the 60s, late 60s. The problem is, of course, there's a reason that the Warriors left. There's a reason the Raiders left, and there's a reason the A's are leaving. And I don't think that bodes well for any possibility of Oakland getting an NHL team. Plus, there's really not a move right now to bring one in there. But it was mentioned by some people on site, so I decided to address that. Portland, they could very well get an NHL team. Now, hockey is pretty popular in Oregon, not as die-hard popular as, say, in Minnesota and Wisconsin and in the Midwest and the Northeast, but there is a very popular hockey following in the Cascadian region. I think the odds are they could get a team if the NHL looks to expand not just one or two teams, but maybe three or four. Houston. Another city that gets mentioned every time there's a possibility of a team moving. They've obviously got the market, and they do have a history. The Houston Aeros of the old WHA were very popular back in the day. You've only got one NHL team in Texas right now, the Dallas Stars. And Texas is a big enough state they could support two NHL teams. On this list, I'd say there's four certainties: Quebec City, Milwaukee, Houston, and Portland. Likely to get an NHL expansion team. Houston definitely would be number 2 on that list, only because Quebec City would almost certainly get a franchise first. Hamilton, Ontario. Long since the feeling has been that Hamilton deserves an NHL franchise. The only problem is they are so close to Toronto that the Maple Leafs will block any move by any team trying to bring an expansion or existing team to Hamilton. They would need a new arena too. And because of the Maple Leafs, I don't think you're going to see Hamilton get a team anytime soon, unless the Leafs renege and there is sort of a power sharing kind of a deal. Remember, Toronto tried to keep Ottawa out of the NHL 30 years ago, before the Senators became a thing. And finally, Saskatoon, Regina. The Canadians love their hockey, but Winnipeg, even though the Jets have been successful in recent years and had some playoff runs, they really are a team that has to really make sure they're very, very popular in the city. Because if that team starts to kind of go to the bottom of the standings and apathy starts to set in and it hits the box office, there will be rumors of Winnipeg moving again. That's why I think will not happen. That's why you won't see Saskatoon and Regina, because it's too small of a market to really keep up an NHL team. They love their hockey. They're just not big enough of a market, I think, in the eyes of the sports business people to really hold an NHL team. All right, we're going to go down to Major League Baseball right now before we call it quits for the night. Let's go through the candidates real quick. First of all, let's talk about the reason Major League Baseball isn't expanding right now, because the A's question is not settled yet, although it could be in the next year or two with a possible move to Las Vegas. You've got the prospect of the Rays moving once their lease is up in 2027, I believe. And already there's talk about them. I think it's maybe a certainty that starting next year they'll have some games in Montreal. That doesn't bode well. You know, when you're sharing a team with another city, that doesn't say much for your marketplace. Either Tampa gets a new stadium for the Rays, or the Rays are going to move. And there are one or two places they could move, Montreal or Charlotte. My feeling is whoever gets the Rays, the other city will get an expansion franchise. And I think the odds are Charlotte will get the Rays and Montreal will get a new Major League team. Because Montreal, they would want to put in the NL and leave Toronto in the AL for the potential of a Canadian World Series, which would be a nightmare to certain Americans, I'm sure. Nashville is talked about a lot. I could see it happening. I don't think there is great of a candidate as Charlotte or Montreal, but I could definitely see them getting a team. Portland obviously is going to be on the mix there, but I think if an NBA team an NHL team goes there, and especially an NFL team goes there, there would be too much saturation in that market. I think it would scare off any potential expansion. But if that doesn't happen, it's just the Blazers and the Timbers of the MLS. I could see a major league team going up there. Las Vegas is more than likely going to get the A's. So I don't think we're going to have to worry about Vegas getting an expansion franchise. San Antonio. Texas loves baseball. They're not as passionate about it as they are their football, but they love their baseball. And I could see San Antonio supporting an Major League Baseball team. The problem is, I think the Rangers and the Astros would not want competition there. And plus, the Texas market could be saturated soon enough. And I don't think Major League Baseball would want to put a third team in a marketplace that's going to be saturated to begin with, especially if an NFL team goes to San Antonio. Memphis and Louisville, great minor league baseball towns. Could they support Major League Baseball? I'm on the fence. I don't think they could support Major League Baseball to the expectation of Major League Baseball. They're great minor league towns. I don't know if they would be great major league towns. Birmingham, they'd obviously need a stadium. They have a Double-A team. Would they be able to support a major league team? They've got the marketplace for it. I don't think there's enough passion. Plus, a lot of Alabamians are either Braves fans, or there are some who are Reds fans that are close to the Tennessee border. I just don't think you're going to get... I don't think there's a passion there in Birmingham for a baseball team. Buffalo. Buffalo hosted, for a time, the Toronto Blue Jays. Last year and earlier this season, before they could go back to their home stadium in Toronto. They have a great AAA team, a lot of passion for that team. I'm going to surprise a lot of people. I could see it happening. They would almost certainly need a retractable roof stadium, though, because of April, and if they have postseason baseball in October. That would almost certainly have to happen. And finally, Vancouver. Vancouver, big city. But their only other foray in pro sports outside of the CFL and the NHL, the Vancouver Grizzlies, that didn't last long before they were headed off to Memphis. There is passion for baseball in that area. Whether or not it could be sustained remains to be seen. I don't think there's really the passion for Major League Baseball in Vancouver. You would obviously have a rivalry with Toronto, West Coast versus East Coast, in a sense. Even though Toronto's not on the East Coast, technically it's in the Eastern time zone. I just don't see it happening. It's a great metropolitan area. They could definitely support it economically. Whether or not the fans would come out and really get behind a Vancouver Major League team, I just don't see it happening. It's possible. But the Mariners are not too far away. They've done a lot to get a lot of folks in that marketplace. I just don't see it happening. Well, folks, we are on 55 minutes of talking about a topic that many of you probably don't care about, but I kind of like the topic, and I decided to go ahead and press forward with it, so I decided to go ahead and do it tonight. Thank you very much for your attention tonight. Hope you had a great Saturday night. And I'm going to go rest my voice now because I can feel my throat being a little bit strained right now. I'm hoping it's not a sore throat because last thing I need is get anything, especially as freaking COVID. So, thank you once again. Hope you have a great evening and great weekend and all that, and Merry Christmas too. If I don't hear from you, or you don't hear from me anytime soon. As we always like to say here, good night, good luck, and may the good news be yours.